A very good evening to all of you from India. Namaskar. And good morning to those who are coming from the United States and the other part of the hemisphere. We also would like to wish you Tashi Delek and Assalamu alaikum for those who have come from different parts of the world today. And we would also like to wish Sain Banu for the, in a way, my apologies for pronouncing it in a different way, but we are actually delighted. We are really honored that you have all joined the discussion today on the ethnic law, draft law, the new ethnic draft law that China has introduced in the National People's Congress. And there is a huge interest generated and concern, of course, on the several provisions in the draft ethnic law, including on the Mandarin language, Putonghua, to be the primary language of instruction in the proposed draft law. And there is also the suggestion for including the at a very early stage educational requirements from the in the ethnic minorities, specifically in terms of ethnic unity and love for the Communist Party, as has been mentioned in the draft law. There is also the multi-ethnic unity that the law tries to impose on the ethnic minorities. We have seen some tendencies before in the past 10 to 15 years in western parts of China, and these have acquired a number of dimensions, like the Sinicization of Tibet, as was mentioned by the Tibet Forum meeting in August 2020. And before that, the strike hard policies that were practiced in other ethnic minority regions, including among the Uyghurs. There is the Mandarin language imposed in Mongolian schools. These have created a lot of concern for the minorities. And there is also the effort under this draft law to mobilize the enterprises, mainly controlled by the Communist Party. As you all know, in 1992, the then President Jiang Zemin introduced a law, corporate law, whereby any firm which employs more than 7 people should have a party committee in that private firm. In other words, most of the private enterprises in China today have a party committee if it employs more than 7 people. And this has created also the guidance and ideological work led by the Communist Party in enterprises, which is very crucial for the economic growth and the economic control. Then there is also the aspect of the draft law which criminalizes the ethnic unity, acts that damage the ethnic unity. There is also the repression on the minorities in China. And there is the ideological enforcement that is created through this draft law in many fields, in social, cultural, religious, and in urban planning. There is the law also, the draft law also suggests to extending control and propaganda beyond China's borders, basically targeting Taiwan and also overseas Chinese China today has 16 police stations abroad, and it has been utilizing these services for controlling mainly the overseas Chinese in terms of their views. We have seen an incident in UK, United Kingdom, where in Manchester, the consulate grabbed a person from Hong Kong who was demonstrating, and he was beaten black and blue. And finally, he was thrown out. So such incidents have recurred repeatedly in recent times, which creates concern not just about the ethnic minorities as this draft law suggests, but it also includes the Han Chinese who are living abroad or those who are in China who provide for the broader solidarity with the ethnic minorities. So this draft law, there are several other draconian positions which suggest that there should be a discussion on this issue. And Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives is delighted to invite all the speakers, the participants for this webinar. May I also suggest that we are honored to have several distinguished speakers among the audience today. We have Ms. Rushan Abbas. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us today evening. And we want you to speak at a time convenient for you. And congratulations on the honor by the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, for providing you with the award for your faith, freedom, courage, and the various activities that you have conducted with courage in several spheres, but specifically in confronting the repression of speech and belief while affirming the fundamental rights to worship freely, speak the truth without fear, and also live according to one's own conscience. Thank you, ma'am, for joining this discussion. We would also like to acknowledge, we just saw the message from Kalon Dolmagyari that she is having some technical issues with the internet. She would join anytime. Please bear with that. And several other distinguished speakers. So without much ado, may I request the speakers which have been highlighted. So just to save time, what we are doing at FNVA is to put the bio of the speakers in the chat box. As the speaker continues to speak, we will have the bios projected in the chat box. Those of you who are not familiar, kindly refer to this chat box in order to get the specific information about the speaker. So I would not like to read at this moment, but give a chance for the speaker to express. So may I request Ms. Rushan Abbas to kindly deliver your speech, ma'am.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. As I mentioned earlier, when I first joined, I'm joining you from Berlin, where once a wall stood here, and it fell as a symbol of the oppression or trying to cage up the freedom and democracy will not work. So I'm just going to give a brief, quick introduction of who the Uyghurs are and what's happening to them today. And as we all know, what China is doing to the Uyghurs is not just about the Uyghurs future or Uyghurs' current situation. It's China's broader threat to the future of the entire world. And you mentioned that the current the laws being introduced and the language ban. All are very much familiar with Southern Mongolians, Tibetan friends, and they are our people. So as an Uyghur American, it's strange to see a growing recognition of the world built around disaster when we look at how they are engaging with China and the trade and the, all kind of deals and businesses with China, rather than the proud and the beautiful culture that I come from, our Tibetan friends here come from, our Mongolian friends here come from, that our heritage that we are proud of. When I spoke the name Uyghur a few years ago, the world, when I tried to tell them that I am Uyghur, that my people are being thrown into concentration camps, it seemed unbelievable to most of the world. Our culture and our religion is being criminalized, and our language is being banned, and our wealth is taken in our homeland, East Turkestan. The Chinese colonizers give our new region the name Xinjiang, which means new territory, a colonized title we refuse to accept. And also we refuse to being called minorities because we were not minorities in our own homeland, like Tibetans and the Mongolians and the Uyghurs. We are the owners of those lands. And just because these Chinese Communist government and the People's Republic of China took our land and call us a small minority, we like to be referred as ethnicity, the Uyghur ethnic group or Tibetan ethnic groups. So the implementation of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative is the key reason for this current active full-fledged genocide against my people. And this has given the CCP the ability to seize Uyghur lands and the homes. Recent reports show that land transfer of the Uyghurs to the Chinese government last 20 years increased so much to the point of it, it shows a 50-fold increase to 50-fold. The silencing of the Uyghur intellectuals who are considered cultural leaders and the famous writers was the first clue that China had branded an entire ethnic group as extremists, and it had the intention of eradicating the Uyghur language and the culture and the history. And now the CCP is using policies that echo pre-crime ideology, arresting people and imprisoning them before they even commit a so-called crime based on the apparent ability to predict political criminals. Of course, the most appalling thing is that Uyghurs have their crimes listed in the Chinese government's leaked documents as things which should be inalienable rights, just basic rights of the Uyghurs. So in this Orwellian horror, the Uyghurs are thrown into concentration camps and being used as slaves in this modern genocide, as the Uyghurs are being like a modern slaves. And the justification for this is based on offenses that are just the basic lawful activities in any other countries, which is, like practicing your religion normally, or visiting abroad, or talking to a relative in abroad, or having many children as you wish, or refusing an arranged marriage, forced marriage with one Chinese man. So the fear of being thrown into camps permeates the atmosphere outside the camps, making it an open-air prison. Inside the camps, horrors both known as unknown await. According to former detainees, the people in the camps are facing physical and mental torture, and they are subject to not just the CCP's propaganda day and the night, but also subject to a different kind of unknown medications being tested on them. So basically they are using as guinea pigs and also as victims of forced organ harvesting. And women have been particularly brutalized. In addition to forced marriages, they are vulnerable to sexual abuses in their own homes. As Chinese state media reported that 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres, mostly male, moved into Uyghur homes to supervise and monitor their daily lives. So imagine when most of the men are taken to the concentration camps, women are subject to sexual abuse inside of their own home. Women are also forced to have abortions, forcibly sterilized, have IUD devices forcibly inserted, or are even permanently sterilized against their will. And this caused plummeting the birth rates among some of the Uyghur areas, dropped down to 0%. And Chinese government is not even keeping this secret, and they are publicly celebrating those genocidal efforts by the Chinese embassy in the United States posted on social media saying that Uyghur women are no longer baby-making machines. And just like what's happening in Tibet, there are about 1 million Uyghur children are taken from their families and the central state-run orphanages. So this genocide is not creeping quietly into oblivion as more and more people are being destroyed. It's creeping towards the free world as the CCP destroys and seduces all those in its path with false promises. So my own family case is horrifying proof. My sister, a retired Uyghur medical doctor, Gulshan Abbas, disappeared from her home just 6 days after I spoke in a public panel at Hudson Institute denouncing China's genocidal policies and the outlining fate of my in-laws. So with that, since September 2018, it has been more than 7 years, but 2,800 days that my sister is in China's dark dungeon. I have rearranged my entire life to advocate for my sister and millions of Uyghurs after that. I was working as an international business development director. I had a very successful career. But when the Chinese government took my sister to silence me, I wanted to show them it's not going to work. I am not going to give in. You may break my heart by taking my sister, but you cannot break me, my spirit. So I have to fight with unbroken will and the spirit against this Chinese government. And pain is what is driving me, but also love, the love I have for my sister. The Chinese government never understand, and the CCP is underestimating the power of love. The love I have for my sister, my people, the love I have for humanity, and the love I have for the freedom and democracy and the future of this free world. So what's most painful of all, however, is recognizing the collective complicity of the world. That disappoints me. When we look at companies and the countries continuously treating China as a legitimate business partner. When you look at, those Hollywood celebrities and the famous NBA superstars or popular, famous talk show hosts, they are so vocal against any kind of social injustice. But where are they when the Uyghur women's bodies have become the battleground of this genocide? They don't speak out, because when you speak out against the CCP, there's the consequences. And if you pick and choose on who you want to advocate, or if you feel like, because you are getting some sort of economic benefits from Beijing, you just decide to look at with a blind eye to the Uyghur atrocity, that doesn't give you any legitimacy or credibility of speaking against any atrocity in anywhere. So where does this leave the world? With that, collectively guilty, we are all complicit in the world that China is controlling. We are complicit and we are enablers of this genocide when we use the goods manufactured with forced labor. My sister could have made that shirt on your back. Everything you use, the clothes on your closet, the car you drive, tomatoes on your food, and the seafood, and the cotton you use, the shoes you wear, the handbag that you carry, all of them has some parts manufactured with my people's slave labor. So if you use those goods manufactured by the companies using Uyghur slaves and for their supply chains, we are all complicit if we do that, and that those companies are making us the enablers of this genocide, because we are enabling China's economy to continue this genocide and to make this genocide as a profitable venture for the CCP. This action should stem from recognizing the areas where we must break the hold of evil. We should cease consuming products that are manufactured with Uyghur blood, sweat, and the tears. And we must use our voices to cry out to the entire world. We need to educate them, we need to activate them, we need to empower them, and demand change. The phrase "never again" cannot be rendered meaninglessly. And the CCP has created the most advanced model of genocide in the history, because they are erasing a whole population from the society, all while spreading enough disinformation and false propaganda so that we just sit by and watch. Before it was fully unleashed on the Uyghur people, the system was tested in Tibet. Then what began there was perfected and expanded in East Turkestan. Then it spread it to Hong Kong, then Taiwan. Now these same cameras are used in the government buildings around the world, and in schools, and in private homes, in shopping centers. To date, about 50% of African countries have contracted Chinese firms to implement public security systems modeled after China's own. And China has deployed police stations worldwide to have a foothold in democratic nations. The CCP is strategically increasing its data supply from around the world. For what? The very technology and the human innovation that should uplift humanity is being exploited for oppression. The CCP's model empowers other dictatorships to follow. We must wake up, and the companies building these tools must be held accountable for how their technology is used. Governments must respond by implementing the protections needed against the technological oppression. Today in Berlin, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are gathering here like Uyghur women for the Uyghur Women's International Uyghur Women's Dialect. We are adopting the Berlin Declaration Platform for Action on Uyghur Women's Rights and the Freedoms that has developed and now holds endorsement of 82 international organizations and almost 140 individuals, altogether like 230 individuals and international organizations. We adopted this declaration, which calls governments, UN, corporations, global civil societies to act against the CCP's genocide in East Turkestan, and the most specifically, the targeting of Uyghur women in the campaign of Erasure. Marking, this year, marking the 30 years since China's 1995 Beijing Declaration, this document exposes forced sterilization, family separation, sexual violence, and mass surveillance as tool of repression, and urges accountability, justice, and the protection for Uyghur women. So what's happening to my people is this genocide is ground zero. What's unfolding in my homeland is a glimpse into the future of tyranny powered by technology. So if we remain complicit, China's silent invasion and the colonization will spread and dismantle the free world. If we do not act to stop it today, it will be our children and our grandchildren who will pay the price of an illiberal dark world, because we are all responsible for what happens next. The weight of this moment in the time will echo through generations, and the history will remember whether we turn away or turn the tide, because the silence is the oxygen of the tyranny, and let us be the voice that breaks it before it's too late. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abbas, for that passionate speech. We would like to also highlight the kind of depiction the Chinese leaders have mentioned. For example, on ethnic aspect, there is the mention about a pomegranate, that these seeds are together in a pomegranate fruit, and also very tightly kind of embraced in that format, with no freedom for the ethnic groups. Also, you have rightly mentioned about the repression, the ESS cases, endangered state security cases of the People's Armed Police Force and other organizations is almost 54% for the region, affecting the Uyghurs. So the ESS cases have been slapped on Uyghurs on a very extensive case, a very extensive level. More than half of the whole of Chinese cases are on Uyghurs. And it reflects to the repression. And you have also rightly mentioned about the unemployment that is created with the Hanization of the region, with many Han Chinese flooding the region and making Uyghurs as a minority by these population transfers. And also the strike hard policies have really created substantial damage. It began with Party Secretary Chen Chuan-ko over a decade ago, and this has been continued extensively. Thank you, ma'am, for your passionate intervention here. Some audience may like to raise some questions, but we would request you to hold on for a while. We will have two speakers to speak first, and then we will have the questions entertained. Kindly bear with us on this issue. And I wanted to go to the next speaker, Mr. Enghebatu Togochog, who would speak from the Mongolian perspective. Over to you, sir.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from across different time zones. First of all, allow me to express my sincere appreciation to our friends from Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives for organizing this panel and inviting us to share our perspectives on specifically on China's draft law on promoting ethnic unity and progress. Since this topic of this panel is specifically on this draft law, so let me give you a brief summary of this draft law and what is true intention and what China is trying to achieve with this draft law. So this draft law consists of 7 chapters and 62 articles, and while it is framed as a law meant to promote unity, actually its essence is far from benign. There are things These are the things, the following is the things at the course. For example, chapter 2 speaks of building a common spiritual home. In practice, this means forcing all the so-called ethnic minorities or ethnic groups into a single identity, the Zhonghua nationality or Chinese nationality. It's just a euphemism of the Chinese nationality. It just they call it Zhonghua. It's just Chinese. So chapter 3 promotes the so-called mutual interaction, mutual exchange, and mutual integration. This language is nothing but a euphemism for assimilation, for systematic disappearance of Mongolian, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other distinct national identities. So chapter 4, titled the promoting common prosperity and development, it actually is a thinly veiled justification for the resource extraction and economic exploitation, especially in the occupied regions of Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. So the chapter 5 outlines this safeguard and supervision mechanisms. Basically, this is a new tools to enforce these policies across China proper, and particularly in the region of Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. So it's a mechanism for enforcement. So the chapter 6 is about legal liability or legal responsibility, which is actually laying out how individuals and organizations who do not comply with the policy will be punished. And the most alarmingly, chapter 7 is explicitly stating that the foreign organization and individual who undermines ethnic unity or incite ethnic division shall bear legal responsibility under Chinese law. So this is nothing less than an attempt to legalize China's ongoing transnational repression, extending the Chinese regime's reach beyond its borders to silence voices globally. So the heart of the draft law is the forced identity conversion. The key idea running through the entire draft is the so-called firm inculcation of the Chinese nationality common identity, or the so-called 诸老中华民族共同第一线 Chinese. So this is saying nothing but we, Mongolians, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other so-called ethnic minorities will no longer be allowed to have our own national identities. We must become Chinese and only Chinese. So this is not unity, this is the erasure. So the law's ideological foundation is actually to impose on us the full package of the following. 1, Great Mother Nation of China. 2, Chinese nationality or Zhonghua nationality. 3, Chinese culture. They often call it the Chinese superior culture, 优秀文化. And 4th is loyalty to the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. And 5th, the socialism with the Chinese characteristic. So this is not about coexistence or unity. This is actually the identity restructuring, identity erasure, engineered and enforced by the state. So in the international community, China always presents itself as a country governed by law, but we know this is pretty much an international joke. It's not true. And in China, laws do not protect civil rights, human rights, or fundamental freedom of the citizen. Instead, laws are weapons or tools designed to criminalize, punish, and brutalize both citizens and the people of the occupied nations. So, seen in this light, and this draft law is not just a policy. It is not just a policy. It's a warning, a clear indication of what the regime is preparing to implement against the Chinese citizens and then people of the occupied nations. So, as a Mongolian, from the perspective of Southern Mongolia, I see this as this is a justification of the cultural genocide that is taking place in Southern Mongolia. So the draft law is attempting to provide legal justification for the ongoing cultural genocide, including the erasure of Mongolian language, culture, and identity, and the very aggressive, language policy that started imposing in 2020. And the elimination of Mongolian medium instruction in schools, which is actually the Mongolian language was the backbone of Mongolian survival of our identity, but now the government of China is targeting it. So what happening in Southern Mongolia right now is China's literally erasing the word Mongolian, Mongolia from literature, arts, music, and songs, and renaming all Mongolian schools and removing the keyword Mongolian and taking down signs from schools, parks, and public places across Southern Mongolia. So all of this is now framed as necessary for ethnic unity. So another aspect of the this draft law is the justification of the resource extraction and economic exploitation. In 2009, China announced that Southern Mongolia is China's energy base. World's almost 95% of the rare earth production is coming from Southern Mongolia. China claims this is their Chinese resource, but the world doesn't know. Actually, China does not have any rare earth. It's from Southern Mongolia, occupied nation of Southern Mongolia. There's one single mine called Bainobo is producing world's 95% of the rare earth production. So recently also China announced that they discovered the world's largest thorium deposit, again in Southern Mongolia. This single deposit could, according to some estimate, provide China with energy for 60,000 years. So that this is, how rich Southern Mongolia is in. But China is extracting this, and then this law is justifying all this. So this draft law provides political cover for all this massive extraction and exploitation of Southern Mongolian mineral resource. Also, this draft law is a blueprint of this final solution. We call this final solution to the Mongolian issue, or in general, the ethnic problem at large. So China is preparing to wipe out the distinct identity of all 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities once and for all. The goal is to transform the country into a single homogeneous Chinese society, free from any type of ethnic problem or nationality question. So the regime not only wants to erase our identity, but also wants to erase world's memory about us entirely. This is the goal and the true intention of this draft law. So in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the world must not be deceived by the language of unity and progress. This draft law is a blueprint of cultural annihilation, forced assimilation, and heightened repression, both within China's borders and beyond. So we, the people of Southern Mongolia, Tibet, East Turkestan, and then all other distinct nations under Chinese rule, see this law clearly for what it is. In Southern Mongolia, despite all this brutal repression, people are still protesting online, carrying out solo protests with social media, rallying the entire Southern Mongolia to stand up to defend their national freedom and national dignity. And today, by speaking together, we affirm that no law, no matter how forcefully written or how brutally enforced, can erase the truth of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enghebatu Togochog, for enlightening us on the draft law that China is about to discuss in the National People's Congress. And a number of issues you have covered in terms of the erasure rather than promoting unity among ethnic communities. Also about the laws as tools or weapons rather than the rule of law related, and justification of resource exploitation and the kind of economic exploitation that China is doing in these ethnic areas. There is a lot of history to this, and there has been a lot of debate in China since the 19th century. For example, the Qing dynasty considered barbarians and civilized. That kind of discourse has led to trouble for the ethnic communities. And there is also the suggestion during that period of 5 races under one nation, unified into a Chinese nation. But there was a discussion at the time about equal rights and duties. However, today we see assimilation as the main focus. During the Qing dynasty, we also had the reflections on Yunnan province, which has a number of ethnic communities living, several hundreds of them. And one of the major figures in this is Liang Qichao. During the late 19th century, he suggested to building a modern state based on all ethnic groups. And we also saw post Qing dynasty collapse and the Republican government, there is the 5 races under one union. There was that suggestion which was kind of incorporated in the later debates by Sun Yat-sen, who considered assimilationist policies towards minorities, but it was rejected by the Provisional Assembly in 1912. Chiang Kai-shek considered minorities as a single unified Chinese nation. You did mention about Chunghua Minchu. This originates in the Republican era under Chiang Kai-shek very extensively, and in terms of the assimilation of minorities. The 1931 Constitution of the Soviet Republic coincidentally argues for self-determination of the ethnic minorities. It was mentioned that there is the very specific mention in this 1931 November declaration of this constitution. Also interestingly, Article 9 of the Common Program in 1949 September mentions about the equal rights and duties for all the minorities, and the Article 50 mentioning about unity and mutual aid among themselves. So there is that socialist project that has been introduced. Li Wei-han's policies and subsequently the Cultural Revolution impact on ethnic groups as well as the reform and opening up policies also, as you mentioned, in terms of the exploitation of resources. There has been a major jettisoning of the um, economic freedom, development, etc. Jiang Zemin, for example, in '93, suggested to actively guiding the adaptation of religion to socialist society. In those Sangha Taipiao, one of that is projecting Neo-Confucianism at the cost of the religions of the ethnic groups. We also saw the assimilationist policies, specifically Sinicization, for the past 5 or 6 years. There is the discussion from Fei Xiaotong, Marung, and others. It appears the Chinese are now today veering more towards a revisionist ethnic policy, which is more centralized in nature. So there is the trouble brewing up for the ethnic groups, and this draft ethnic law further amplifies the problems that they have. Thank you very much for these, and we will have a discussion now. And then later the other distinguished speakers will intervene. So there are actually some questions that were made for the first 2 speakers. Would you like to respond to these, Ms. Abbas and Mr. Togochog? There is one intervention by Akoy Jam, who is suggesting why all the minorities in China, like Tibetans, Mongolians, Uyghurs, think that a proposed draft law is not good for them. And please suggest how it can approach policymakers in China politically and advocate to change accordingly in alignment with the minorities. Would any of the 2 take up this question? I mean, you have already explained, but some specific suggestions related to approaching policymakers in China politically and trying to advocate change. I know it's a very difficult question, but Madam Abbas, would you like to respond for this? How do we change the draft law, exerting pressure on the lawmakers in NPC?
Well, we have a lot of work to do in DC, of course. But how do we change the draft law in China? Using anything that, if there's anything is going to be impactful. I think China is not going to hear or understand sanctions or pressure of changing the draft laws. So what if they have the law? They have beautiful constitution, but they don't follow. It's just empty words on the, it's just the black and the black ink on the white paper means nothing for them. So what they hear is the financial sections. What China will understand is the economic sanctions and economic, like if there's anything is going to hurt their economy, that's the only thing that's going to work. So we should collect all of our efforts on how do we do that? How do we cut off China's bloodline? How do we stop fueling the Chinese economy with Western companies and the old world? I always mention this when I give talks, and I always ask, how do you compete with free labor? Who can compete with that? India cannot, Europe cannot. I'm here in Berlin for a week now. What China is doing, what those companies are doing with China's forced labor, using the forced labor for their supply chains, killing the German businesses, middle-class businesses here. So I think what we need to do is push strong implementation of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and also we need to collect our efforts together with Mongolia and Tibetan friends. We need to work together to create economic sanctions and work with lawmakers in DC to have more bills like UFLPA. And, you know, I see my older friend Pierro here, who is the champion for fighting against the CCP and the working on so many important bills. So we all need to work together to support what Pierro is doing, what CECC is doing, or what Christmas or Young Kim, Tom Swazi, or other lawmakers who are introducing the bills to hurt the China's economy. So that's one of the key advice we should all learn, and we should all work together.
Thank you very much for that observation. Mr. Togochog, would you like to intervene?
Sure. I totally agree with Madam Abbas about how to effectively pressure China. So, pressuring Chinese leadership or Chinese lawmakers to change or amend the draft is pretty much meaningless, because in China is not a country of rule of law. Law is pretty much just useless, meaningless. Only it's meaningful when it comes to abuse the citizens, criminalize the use of law. The law is very selective weapon there. They don't protect the rights. Law is like, usually law has two aspects. One, defend the rights of the citizen, and then the other side of the law is of course restrict or just if necessary, just give some criminalization, give some criminal act. But China is using law as a weapon to just criminalize very just demand. So in this sense, I don't think it's effective for anyone to try to approach the Chinese leadership or like lawmakers to, hey, look, you just change it a little bit to make it better. Even if they do it, yes, they can do it. They can make it very beautiful. The Constitution is, if you look at the Constitution, it's pretty much flawless. You cannot really find any problem with but the problem is the implementation. They don't they don't implement it as it says. So for example, in 2020, when the government of China implemented the new language policy in Southern Mongolia, in order to completely wipe out Mongolian language, what they said is like, some part of the local laws, referring to the so-called ethnic minority autonomy law, they said is unconstitutional. They can declare anytime, any moment, this is unconstitutional. Well, without going through any official amendment to the law. So its law is pretty much meaningless in China, but only meaningful for why we are looking at this law, draft law, because its indication is hinting what they want to do. They want to wipe out the entire identity of all the 55 ethnic minorities, and then this is the final solution to the long-standing ethnic problems. They want China, want us to disappear entirely, so that the Chinese side will become completely Chinese. So that's their intention.
Thank you very much. If there are no quick questions, we go to the third speaker, Rinzin Namgyal. Would you like to intervene now? He's from the Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, thank you, Dr. Kondapalli, sir. And firstly, Tashi Delik for all on the Global Compassion Year of celebrating His Holiness 14 Dalai Lama's birthday. So, like, so yeah. So firstly, I will go with my presentation. So I have made it into a short but precise in my own capacity. Firstly, I want to discuss on the politics of lawmaking in China, in a short. Then about this draft law. Then about my own interest, which is a macro analysis of the identity which they are going to engineer in the Tibetan region, especially. So I want firstly to convey Sonamla to firstly show me the first slide. So this one is the last slide. If you can show me the first slide. Yeah. So yeah, let's begin with the topic, which is about the draft law. Either it is a unity or a erasure. In my opinion, in short, it is both. It is a like the two sides of a same coin. In order to unite, they are trying to erase, and in order to erase, their intention is to unite the ethnic minority regions. So firstly, I will go with the politics of lawmaking in China. So lawmaking in China, firstly, they went with the agenda setting. Like they have hundreds of legislative proposals every year, each year, which they use to what you call store in their own departments, committees for many years. And these proposals are mainly come from the ministers and the small leading groups committee and think tanks, even the individual policy entrepreneurs. And many remain dormant within the ministries until the political climate becomes something favorable to bring that what you call the research and those articles in the discussion, in the serious discussion of the central leaders and even the standing committee of National People Congress. And secondly, they went into they used to go into the interagency review that they conducted by here. The many of the bargainings happen in this phase that they used to bargain among ministries. If you take the example of a national democrat, what you call about the Chinese railway, if Chinese railway pass the bill about the railway, but firstly, it will go with the consensus of the many of the committees, especially the land committees and even the geography by like those committees who are supervising the Chinese topography and all, and even including the Chinese steel industries and all. With all the consensus, they are going forward with some kind of laws. It's not something like the single committee cannot go with the law and all. There need to be a consensus. So here the top leadership occasionally intervenes to resolve the bureaucratic deadlock. So in this law, in my opinion, these things are like the second points were, I think, has some kind of visibility, and I will try to explain it later on in the next slide. And the third is that this slide crucially shapes the final content of any draft law. In the second, what you call stage, there is interagency review. So the next slide, please. So the next slide generally talks about the NPC review, which is mainly primarily governed by the National People Congress Standing Committee, and also the party approval is something like prerequisite in this phase. But any opposition is rare also in this phase because nobody can have a capacity to oppose, which is something approved by the Politburo and all. So the NPC cannot promulgate their own laws without the approval of the Politburo. And the fourth point is the last phase is the implementation that is generally done by the State Council. that is something led by the State Council Legislative Bureau, and also the relevant ministries and the Supreme People's Court also. And that is heavily, but the thing is that any law which is passed in China, that generally doesn't mean that that will implement in the ground level. It need a budgetary, it need a resources, it need a bureaucratic capacity to implement that. It is not something that if something law is passed in the National People Congress Standing Committee or the like the two sessions and all, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will implement on the ground. So the third point is that NPCO oversights in implementations is growing but remains limited. That the National People Congress try to intervene into the State Council when they are about to implement the law, but there is very limited that the National People Congress can do if the State Council is not ready with the implementation of that law because of some kind of like factor like the budgetary and the bureaucratic capacity and like so on. So the last point is that not all law pass fully implement, like I've said that not all law is something like implemented in the what you call practice. So the next slide, please. So the next slide, I want to just briefly go with this law or background that this law is generally sponsored by the National People Congress Ethnic Affairs Committee. That in the National People Congress there are many committees, but like around 7 to 8 committees. But this law is something sponsored by the National Ethnic Affairs. Even they have said that previous year in 2024 they have done a nationwide legislative leaders inspections, like to come up with this kind of like contents of law. But I don't believe that only by just going only by just inspecting the about this law in just 1 year that they can come up with such kind of like contents about the 20 like 62 articles and 7 chapters. But I think many of these articles and the essence are something in the research paper and all something that is something floating and that is something in the Chinese ministry for many years. So like the thing is, and also this law is something initially a category 2 of 14 National People Congress Standing Committee plan, and later it was elevated to the high priority. So the political directive is that this law generally comes after the Politburo session of the third committee, like the third plenary session, where they have discussed about the building of a sense of a strong community for a Chinese nation. And that comes with the second slide, which I've discussed earlier, that sometimes if some kind of like law is getting deadlocked in some kind of like agencies with the center or the top leadership intervention, that law will be able to go into the fast track into the discussion into the debate of the National People Congress Standing Committee. And the thing is that its significance is also that the Politburo have discussed this also on the 29th of August 2024, after 3 months of the plenary session, and even they have disclosed this content in the public view, and that is something after the 1988, the State Enterprises Law. Generally, Politburo meetings, their draft, like their discussions is something not very much into the public domain, but on this law they have done that, So like the second slide, please. Next slide. So next slide is just generally a question for all the speakers and also the audience, which is something in my mind, that how will this law, the proposed ethnic unity and progress law, concretely manifest into the governance, social behavior, cultural practice in ethnic minority regions once implemented? How this law will get implemented on ground? So that's my question, like how this will get into the implementation on ground, and how this will manifest. And my second question is, why did the Politburo elevate this category 2 legislative project in 2023? What strategic concerns or political shift within CCP made this ethnic law suddenly urgent? So that's my second question, like why Politburo felt in the 2023 to come up with such kind of law and to build, like they used to say, the strong sense of Chinese community, like strong sense of oneness of Chinese community and all. What is the reason behind that? Is it something result of the exile, like Uyghurs, Tibetans, and many others, their political activities and their political lobby, which we used to do with the other governments. This because of this kind of like activities that this kind of law is came into a urgency among the Chinese top leadership. So that's my question for all. So the next slide, please. So the next slide is that they talk about the 2024 field survey. They have done the field survey in 2024 nationwide by the legislative leaders. So based on my data, according to the Chongqing Daily, the Chongqing report, they have said that the Li Hongtong of the National People Standing Committee vice chairman, he toured the Jilin province, and he also chaired the legal research meeting on ethnic affairs. And also he was there in the Yangban's Koren Autonomous Prefecture in the Heilongjiang province, where he have conducted seminars and consultation with the elite level coordination and pre-legislative consultation with the local leaders of that province and all the counties. And the second is the Pang Jingguo, also the vice chairman of National People Congress, according to Chongqing Daily, and she also was there in the Guangxi province in the early month of the 2024, where she was focusing on the ethnic law-based governance and border development, and she also organized a symposium and conference on demonstrating zone for the Chinese national community. So the next slide, please. So these two are based on my observation, because I mainly focus on the upper region. In Tibetan we call Ngawa Peru. In Chinese it is the Upper Shen, Upper County. So it is in the Sichuan province, modern, like in the modern Chinese map, and it's originally the Amdo region. And the Chinese governor Xi Shaolin was there in the Upper region during the late July in 2024. And there is an article in the Abbas website that it is stated she was there on research, but there is no any specific specific data about what research and what type of research she was conducting in that province on the July of 2024. And soon after that, there was a report. Soon after that, there was also a report from the Abbas news channels that they are investing 1 billion yuan to create a school, primary and secondary school with the digital infrastructure across the Abbas county. So her visit to the Abba region and these news, it is just having a mix of differences. And there is also a what you call news from the exiles sources like RFA and all, that in the Kirti Gompa, like the Kirti monasteries in Abba is the main monastery in the Abba region, the Kirti monasteries, and they have news that many of the young monks they are expelled from the monasteries. Chinese authorities are not letting them to stay, keep them in the monasteries. And soon after that, there is also news of the Tibet Action Institute, that the 4 to 5 Tibetan students or small students who are earlier monk, they are trying to commit suicide on the river bank. So the chronology is, this all chronology from my observation started from the Xi Shaolin, the governor of the Sichuan province, and she's some used to say she's a big upcoming star of the Communist Party of China, like that she visited the Abba region. After that, this all chronology happened in my observation, because I mainly focus on the Abba region. And the second is the Wang Huning, who is the chairman of CPCC, and the Wang Xiaohu, who is Sichuan province party secretary. He also visited the Kansas prefecture. There we have a Serta monasteries. It's a big monasteries having many nuns and all, and it is widely support and widely revered by many Tibetans. And they have conducted a central provincial engagement on the ethnic governance reform and all. So the next slide, please. So the last slide. that it is mainly on ongoing policies. For my opinion, the main of the Chinese policies on the ethnic minority regions mainly comes from like that. There are many concepts like that, but for me, this two seems to be very important for me. First is the 12 must, which Xi Jinping have what he proposed during the Central Ethnic Work Conference, something like that, in 2021, something like that. That the main agenda is on the rejuvenation, and like Chinese has a capacity, like they have a pattern to project a very big dream, and under that banner, they are trying to suppress the local, regional, provincial dream of the common people by projecting some kind of like a very big dream, like the Chinese rejuvenation. They are trying to suppress the alternative dream which they are coming up in the country. So like the main thing is just on the identity, equality, security, and unity, and the 5 identities, which is generally like, which is also like the 5 identities is for my readings, like these 5 identities is very much reflected in the, I think, second or third chapter of this law, the draft law, which is on the building a shared spiritual home, which is the earlier speaker have like spoke something on that. That the article from 11 to 21, like most of the articles resemble all these kind of like points that identify yourself with the Communist Party of China, identify with the Great Motherland, identify with the Chinese culture, identify with the Socialist Party, identify with the Chinese nation and all. So the next slide, please. And the next slide is something. Next slide is just on the what my observations, the Article 30, like the 61 and Article 20, which is earlier the speaker have spoke on that. So I don't want to speak much on that. So the next slide. So the last 2 slides is on my own interest and interest, which is something very much to do with the 5 identities, which earlier I have spoke on. That the macro like is a macro level analysis which myself like I'm interested in, I'm pursuing also. That the Chinese use pinyin romanticization and the region quoted ID numbers to represent a subtle but a systematic form of macro level identity engineering. And this is a visa of a Namso Doma. Of a Namso Doma. She is a Tibetan singer who is currently in Bhutan, and this is her visa. And just look at the name, Namso Doma. Even if I am a Tibetan, I can't recognize if she is a Tibetan or a what. So this thing has a serious implications. It is a macro level, but it is a serious implications on the cultural and meaning, and also on the loss of original pronunciation, and also a symbolic meaning that get obscure. In Tibetan, we used to write Namso. Namso generally means sky and sea, and Doma means the white Tara. So here, if they've written something like Choma, something, people cannot understand. So gradually, Chinese is trying to, at a certain level, they're trying to re-engineer the Tibetan identity, not just by the linguistic and monastery restrictions and all, but also by the use of a pinyin in the official documents like their visas, if they want to go to the abroad, even maybe in the internal domestic uses. If someone go to the abroad with this name, even if I'm a Tibetan, I can recognize whether if she is a Tibetan or not. Then how can the other be recognized if she is a Tibetan or not? In the nationality, they have written a Chinese. That is fine. That is something like going on for long. But the thing is that the name, the Namso Doma. So it has a serious implication, the cultural and meaning phonology and Tibetan phonology also, and also loss of original pronunciation and symbolic meaning also get obscured in the long term, thereby gradually reshaping the Tibetan identity at a very subtle level by pinyin, what romanticizations and all. And the last slides is on the Chinese region coded idea. If we will see if someone is from the Tar region, in their Shefentang, they used to go in India. We have Aadhaar card. They used to have a Shefentang, which is their ID card. And if someone is from the Tar, the first letter will be 54. If someone is from the Qinghai, the first two number of the ID always will be 64, 63. And if someone is from the Kanze and our region, which comes under the modern day Sichuan province, it will be a 5-1. So this has a simple, serious implications in my own observations, and also I'm trying to pursue on that more. It's not complete, but that's my own interest. So that's why I thought to present that the regional segmentation in ID numbers correspond to the administrative division of the Tibetan Plateau into the Tar, Qinghai, Kansu, Sichuan province, Yunnan province, with the ID number. That this shift identity from the Pan-Tibetan, because we always used to talk about the 3 provinces of Tibet, and this shifts the identity from the Pan-Tibetan to the provincial Tibetan, aligning personal identities with the state-defined subdivisions. And this has a serious implications in the long term. That the people will, even if they have to do some kind of the bureaucratic exercise and all, and the bureaucratic mechanism and all, in the long run, they have to identify with these 5-1, 5-4, 6-3 numbers rather than a Tibetan. And slowly, gradually, this will fade away. The Pan-Tibetan, the 3 provinces of Tibetan will slowly, gradually fade away, in my own opinion. So this is some kind of a macro level analysis from my own observations. So the last slides. And the last slides, it is generally on that draft law, they have talked about the development. So this is a recent one, and I have made the, I have what you call, try to write something on her face to not show her face. And she's a Rinzin key, and she's an entrepreneur from the Abbas region, which I used to focus on our region. And Chinese always used to talk about the development and development all, Fatang. And they also talk about the Shibuda Kaifa from the 1990s, from the Chiang Zemin time. They have launched a Western development project, and they used to talk about always development. Development is security. Security is a development. Always because of the development, the CCP has a legitimate to rule. But in this is the Sichuan province training program for women in 39 underdeveloped countries. So she is from the Abbas region. Even she's saying in her own channel that I'm alone over here, and I wish someone from my own countries are here so that I can share some kind of share my own opinion and all. So the thing is that Chinese state they are officially recognizing the Abbas county as an underdeveloped county still after the 30 years of the Western Development Project. And also always talking about the development, we have developed Tibet at the very good level and all. They have to some extent they have done, but this is also a different angle to look into, because that is something not I'm saying, but the Chinese state is saying by themselves. But just look at their own what you call the title of their conference, which is on the Sichuan province training program for women in 39 underdeveloped countries, which is 39 comes in only the Sichuan province, and the Abbas comes under the Sichuan province. They recognize Ngawa officially as an underdeveloped still. Then why they are saying it is a developed, always in the foreign media, in the United Nations, at the Geneva and everywhere? Why they are saying that? So that is something my question. So I will end up with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rinzin, for that nuanced presentation regarding the ethnic law, draft law, and impressive as well is with the Chinese Communist Party leaders' visits, Wang Huning and others. Also for mentioning about the articles, the specific Article 15, 20, and others, and the connotations that it may have on the ethnic groups. Thank you very much for that presentation. Let us move on to Dr. Frank Lehberger. His brief CV will be uploaded quickly. Yes. So can we have your views, sir?
Hello, can you hear me? Well, is
Yes.
great. All right. Greetings to everyone wherever you are on the planet, and thank you for the foundation to having me and speak at this panel. I want to highlight that. Sorry. I want to in this draft law on promoting ethnic unity and progress, which I call draft law in short. And it is much more than a legal document outlining coercive ethnic policies. But this law is actually a blank check for cultural genocide via ideological indoctrination, including crude social engineering. It is targeting all members of the PRC's 56 ethnic groups, as well as the Han Chinese who are still happily living outside the grip of the CCP regime, such as the citizens of Taiwan, Republic of China. So let's now deconstruct the underlying ideology which the CCP is instrumentalizing here in this law. It's the traditional Chinese variety of nationalism, which I call here in my presentation, I call Sino-nationalism. It has not much to do with Marxism, Leninism, or with Maoism. So throughout the text of this draft law, we encounter a somewhat abstract term, Chinese nation. It appears also in combination with other jargon, such as shared spiritual home of the Chinese nation. So we need to explain now this opaque and misunderstood term of Chinese nation, which is more than 130 years old. Throughout the last imperial dynasty, which had ruled China from 1644 to 1912, the empire was not dominated by ethnic Han Chinese, but by a relatively small number of ethnic Manchu military aristocracy. And all Han Chinese males had to wear one distinct hairstyle their whole life to show deference to their Manchu overlords. During those days when governance of the empire was becoming corrupt and dysfunctional, a few very progressive Han Chinese scholars and political reformers were trying to formulate a new nationalistic ideology, and which would put previously marginalized and suppressed Chineseness back in its rightful place in a modernizing China at the beginning of the 20th century. Those scholar reformers who wanted to modernize the absolutist empire into a constitutional monarchy came under the influence of major currents of the nationalist discourse that had emerged from the young nation states of Europe. In the nation building process of the first Chinese Republic, right after the collapse of the ethnic Manchu imperial dynasty in 1912, Chinese political theoreticians acknowledged the existence of the same 5 ethnic groups of the old empire, dubbed the 5 races. The term itself being a European import. The 5 are, and you can see on this map here, Han Chinese in red, Manchu in black, Muslims in blue, and Tibetan in yellow. And the Mongolian, South Mongolian in brown or in white. So on this map here, you can see the general traditional area where they all live. So these 5 races were then molded into a novel concept called Chinese nation. In Chinese, 中华民族. The Chinese term 民族, in its modern definition, only appeared in the late 19th century. And it was a literal translation of a Japanese anthropological term for ethnicity. And the Japanese term was minzuku. Translated literally, this means something like people tribe. The idea behind the adoption of this novel terminology and sociological concept during the first decade of the 20th century was to keep the weak and chaotic republic unified and roughly within the same geographical borders as the defunct empire, especially when 4 colonial empires were at the border waiting. So in the north, there was the Russians, in the west and southwest were the British Empire, in the south was the French colonial empire, and in the east was the Japanese empire. The problem was, however, that both Han Chinese and Manchu military aristocracy had alienated all the other 3 groups in rather murderous ways for centuries already, mostly in the form of inhuman ethnic massacres. And they occurred 1750, 1850, and 1905. These old debts of blood became the liability of the young Chinese Republic in 1912. As most of those despised by the Han Chinese, decimated by massacres, ethnic groups, controlled the borderlands to the west, to the northeast, and to the north of this young republic. The problem was, however, that both Han Chinese and Manchu military aristocracy, they had alienated the ethnic groups. The narratives of the nationalist republicans failed to convince, because the Mongolians and the Tibetans swiftly declared their independence from the Republic in 1912 or 1913. So here the Mongolians in white, beyond this brown dotted line, this is the part of Mongolia which declared independence in 1912. Tibet declared independence for several reasons. One was because the Han Chinese imperial general, one Han imperial general, and the provincial governor by the name of Zhao Erfeng had invaded Tibet in 1905. And with his troops, he occupied the capital of Lhasa, forcing the 13th Dalai Lama to flee to India in 1910. Zhao Erfeng and his mostly ethnic Han Chinese soldiers enacted forced assimilation and Sinicization policies, already in 1905, forcing Tibetans to adopt alien Chinese family names, alien Chinese customs, and lifestyles that were totally unsuited for the high altitude environment of Tibet. They massacred thousands of civilians and monks and nuns all over Tibet who resisted. This horror lasted until the collapse of the Manchu Empire in late 1911, forcing the occupation troops to leave Tibet. With this in mind, we can now debunk the narrative of both Chinese communists and nationalists that perfidious British, Japanese, or Russian imperialists were behind the independence movements of Mongolia and Tibet. A gross distortion of historical facts. Now, in 1907, there was a young Chinese nationalist and political theorist by the name of Yang Du. He was already attempting to explain the origin of this novel term, Chinese nation, to everyone in China. In his most famous work, he wrote, "People have assumed that the ethnic Han Chinese were the oldest ethnic group inside China. In fact, the Chinese word Han is only the name of a dynasty founded by the feudal Liu family in 206 BC, rather than the name of an ethnic group. Since ancient times, there always existed one ethnic group with a comparatively higher level of culture and a larger population. This particular ethnic group called itself Central and Civilized, or in Chinese, Zhonghua, and the state where they lived in, Zhongguo, or the Central Land. In this regard, the distinction between states are grounded in their geographical locations. China was the Central Land, while the others lived outside the Central Land. The distinctions between the Chinese and other ethnic groups are grounded in their levels of civilizational development as a culture. Chinese nation, or Zhonghua Minzu, means that this civilization is superior to that of other nearby ethnic groups." End quote, Yang Du. Please note that I do not use the popular trope of Middle Kingdom for China, but I use the more literal translation, Central Land. Yang Du's version of Sino-nationalism, which concurs with the so-called Great Union of the Five Races, seems benign because it stressed multi-ethnic inclusiveness, yet only on paper. The strategic aim behind this ideology was to achieve a kind of homogenization to the inside and a clear delineation to the outside of China. Those five races were regarded as the core of the new nation, yet with Han Chinese being the eternal root culture among the five. The pseudo-rational reasons for this were the so-called superior demography and the supposedly superior culture. The four other races that were automatically reclassified as secondary or being minority, rhyming in Chinese minds with backward. From a critical point of view, Yang Du behaved like a dodgy salesman, tricking the four so-called minorities by dangling in front of them the chance to join this posh elite club called Chinese Nation, feigning progressive inclusiveness, especially when compared to the Han suprematist brand of nationalism, which also existed. And the 19th century's Han supremacist ideologue by the name of Zhang Taiyan openly rejected multi-ethnic forms of Sino-nationalism. He propagated the existence of a Chinese ancestral bloodline going back 5,000 years to some divine emperors who were mere mythical inventions. He also instrumentalized Confucianism as argument that 2,000 years of Chinese cultural continuity reached back to the Han dynasty of the year 200 BC. This Han dynasty was used as example for the supposed supremacy and unmatched greatness of the ethnic Han Chinese. Zhang Taiyan was compulsively suspicious of non-Han, notably of the former empire's oppressively dominant Manchu aristocracy, or the Tatars. This was a racial slur, High Chinese of ethnic Manchu in those days, in Chinese, Dalu, whom Zhang Taiyan wanted to eliminate. The still revered by the CCP, so-called Father of the Republic, Sun Yat-sen, who died in 1925, stated 1 year earlier that, quote, "I say that a nation is a state. Why is it appropriate in China but not in other countries? Because since the Han dynasty, China has always been a nation formed by one people." Therefore, the vast majority of Chinese can be said to be entirely Han Chinese. We share the same bloodline, the same language, script, religion, same customs. We're entirely one nation. Okay, this is quote Sun Yat-sen. Of course, historians have now debunked this Sun Yat-sen 1924 speech as ideological nonsense. But this nonsense is still recycled in the 21st century for the narratives that Xi Jinping and his policy whisperers try to spread for some time now. Ironically, it also reveals the same paradox, the one that was dogging Sun Yat-sen in 1925, and the same one annoying Xi Jinping in 2025. China is supposedly a nation of one people, but in 1925, there were 5 races. And since 1950, there are 55 minorities recognized in China. To mitigate this paradox, Xi Jinping and his policy whisperers have recently come up with something called Chinese Nation Community Consciousness, or 中华民族共同体意识. With this tool, the CCP aims to sacrifice all religions, ethnic history, cultures, and customs on the Sino-nationalistic altar of so-called national rejuvenation and modernization. Basically, an illusory endeavor, as most of those religions, or histories are impossible to press into one artificial mold. For example, Old Mongolian or Tibetan history is not Chinese in any way. Religions like Islam, Confucianism, Taoism, Shamanism, Mongolian Tengrism, or Tibetan Buddhism vary widely. Ironically, these very futile attempts of creating what would be called synthetic unity religion, as spelled out in Article 44 of the draft law, inadvertently reveals that Xi Jinping is painfully aware that today's concept of Chinese nation not only sorely lacks a community consciousness, but also a convincingly genuine spiritual spark, which could be able on its own to captivate the interest of non-Chinese all over the world, not only ethnic minorities, a spark which would be able on its own to captivate interest of non-Chinese. Instead, she only offers a stale pseudo-religious cult based on nationalistic myth, such as national rejuvenation and communist personality cult. That is basically a malevolent idea behind the so-called Sinicized religions of Xi Jinping. The touted shared spiritual home, which appears in Chapter 2 of the draft law, will therefore by design be neither shared nor spiritual, nor become a loving home for anybody, but to remain forever a horror house occupied by Sino-nationalistic death cults presided by high priests, all ordained by Xi Jinping. And despite such seemingly tolerant tropes as shared home, those only flimsily cover the underlying intolerance. The CCP will undoubtedly double down on forced assimilation or Sinicization. This is known in Chinese as Tonghua, Zhongguohua, or Hanhua, leading to ultimate cultural genocide if nothing or no one interferes. Moreover, forcing this so-called community consciousness on everybody is ironically a declaration of ideological defeat. All of Deng Xiaoping's liberal economic development policies after 1984 did not, as expected, accelerate the self-assimilation of ethnic minorities into the PRC mainstream. And they also failed to convince Taiwanese to voluntarily join the PRC to the present day. the PRC's painful realization that economic development is not an efficient tool for automatic self-sinicization of non-Han ethnics is the deeper reason behind all this, especially after the mass protest of 2008, 2009, and last not least, 2019 in Hong Kong. As a result, several Politburo appointed scholars such as Ma Rong and Zhu Weiquan, who do both qualify as Xi Jinping's main sinicization whisperers, have for 12 years encouraged party and state authority to draft much more restrictive and destructive ethnic policies. For example, scrapping the PRC's 1984 ethnic autonomy law, plus cancelling the ethnic minorities' very modest privileges and affirmative action measures, mainly in family planning, employment, and education. All this in order to obliterate the last remnants of distinctive ethnic identity. So in my opinion, this draft law is not a real turning point, but it marks a rehash of unabashedly nationalistic assimilation practices. They are a continuation of a long tradition of coercive but narratively sugar-coated policies, which are more than 130 years old. Policies that even Mao repudiated temporarily for some time before taking over China in 1949 and changing his mind. So the accelerated adoption of this draft law next year is a symptom of Xi Jinping's sense of urgency. In his mind, all vital issues of national unity and sovereignty remain unresolved. His grip on the ethnic periphery in East Turkestan, Tibet, is still haphazard, especially as China's private economy is faltering since 2021. And the Chinese middle class that grew in the last 2 decades is becoming impoverished thanks to neo-Maoist economic policies of Xi Jinping himself. When seen from the legal aspect, the function of this draft law seems to be some sort of an umbrella for already existing, but much more detailed and specific laws and regulations, both on national and local levels. For example, the 2021 Land Borders Law of China, then the 2020 regulations on the creation of a model area of national unity and progress. These regulations are enacted in several autonomous regions, such as Tibet and so-called Xinjiang. Last 2 ones are local regulations that were enacted alongside the Chinese government's 45-year plan starting 2020. With the anticipated start of the 15th 5-year plan next year in 2026, the new draft law represents a second phase of systemic tightening. Since assuming full powers in March 2013, Xi Jinping himself is compulsively obsessed with all kinds of loyalty issues. Also, among the 55 non-Han minorities, whose very existence seemed to endanger his geostrategically grandiose plans, such as the Belt and Road Initiative. This is where the 19th century nationalist Sun Yat-sen, as well as communists like Mao Deng or Hu Jintao, all failed, but where he, Xi Jinping, intends to succeed at all cost. Xi Jinping aims to unite the Chinese nation as one community. He says so in his fifth volume of his work entitled The Governance of China, in which he maintains that, quote, the formation and development of the Chinese nation as one single community follows the will of the people and the irresistible tide of history, end quote, Xi Jinping. This basically paraphrases what Sun Yat-sen said in 1924, mentioned earlier by me here. But no matter what tides he refers to, by artificially asserting a dominant ethnic culture with the aim to forcefully sinicizing all other ethnic groups against their will, Xi Jinping does in fact violate international human rights standards. that are in effect since 1948, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. With all this in mind, I have briefly compared the draft law with various laws and regulations that have been enacted in China for the last 5 years and specifically designed to create unity and preserve territorial integrity by strengthening national sovereignty. In contrast with a very detailed 2021 land borders law of China, the draft law only mentions national defense plus domestic security twice in Articles 46 and 39, and then only in very broad terms, stipulating that local authorities in all border areas are responsible for enacting programs for domestic stability and improved local infrastructure. Article 46 states that the military is responsible for safeguarding national security in border areas by weaponizing military-civilian fusion, especially in the education field, with the aim of brainwashing generations of children, meaning that education is even becoming more militarized in Tibet than it already is. Erasing ethnic identities and cultures via forced education outside of school is part and parcel of what the CCP policies call alter ethnic customs, change habits. In Chinese, it's called Yifeng Yisu. Article 20 of the draft law holds each individual head of household responsible for providing at home the so-called family education and moral guidance for their offspring by indoctrinating them to love the Communist Party, Chinese motherland, Chinese people, and this Chinese nation. This condenses in one sentence what is basically detailed in Articles 19, 13, and 32 of the regulations on the creation of a model area of national unity and progress in the Tibet Autonomous Region, which is requiring that families shall pay attention to family education, meaning that compulsory political indoctrination is extended into the private sphere by turning each head of individual household into an arm of the totalitarian regime, holding him legally responsible for sinicizing his reluctant family members. In case of non-compliance or rejection, they must punish and denounce their offspring themselves, or they will be personally held accountable. The intention behind all this is to pit family members against each other in a divisive and suspicious interpersonal climate, making individuals responsible for the destruction of their own culture, as well as their own social and family cohesion, evaporating remnants of trust. This is basically a modern adaptation of collective punishment that was meted out by imperial officials in some ethnic border areas of southwest China, close to Tibet, in the 18th century. Due to time constraint, I only can do a brief outline comparing old policies and nationalist narratives, which are dating back more than 1 century, with Xi Jinping's current continuation in coercion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lehberger, for that historical narrative, as well as outlining the specific articles of the draft law. This is really useful for the audience and for the FNVA as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you.
So let us go forward with the next speaker. May I invite Professor Xiaoming to make his presentation on the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I ask how many minutes you want to give me so I can structure, and so I'm not going to keep everybody anxious. 10 minutes?
Yes,
minutes?
10 minutes, please. Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to meet that target. Okay. When I talk about this topic, I wanted to talk about 3 points. First is in my horizon, what I am saying. So this is why I am engaged in this topic. Second, we are going to talk about interpretation of the draft law. So what's my interpretation? And then in order to make my interpretation sensible, so what is the background and for this draft? So this 3 points I want to talk about. First thing, I was trained, you see, in international politics, but in my professional career, I, you see, have demonstrated two interests in my intellectual horizon. One is financial crisis, and another is ethnic, you see, issues. So this is why, and for the past 20 years, I have been very close to the Tibetan ethnic group and very close to His Holiness Dalai Lama. Because I have two nightmares, and which I have seen there rising on the horizon of my knowledge. One is financial crisis coming, and another is an ethnic is in the conflict. Eventually, will become a big issue, and these two things are going to cause bloodshed, and so they are going to, you see, cause and millions and probably tens of millions of people and to die. So this is why I am, you see, very, you see, anxious about these two big events and in the future. So this is why I have committed myself to these two major topics. Now, and since we have many prominent presenters and from different ethnic groups, so clearly I am, you see, Chinese. But I want to make it clear, and I have no country, because we are on this panel, as our panelists have noticed, and in the draft law, the last is in the clause is, if you see, and incite or you see do damage to the national unity or ethnic progress, and so you are going to be liable to penalty. So it means, and sitting on this panel, and so we are liable. And but I am not, you see, really concerned of this, because since 2008 I have been banned from going back to China, and even my teacher Wang Huni is sitting on the top position in charge of all this United Front work. And also I want to tell to my panelists, and because my involvement with Tibetan issues, I am in this process to finish proofreading, and also the index for Tibetan book is called in Chinese, because Dalai Lama always want me to tell my story, tell my policy to my Chinese brothers and sisters. So this is why, and I am in this process and of translating one Tibetan and the book and into Chinese, and now in the pipeline to be published in simplified Chinese. Right. So in this book, and one important thing I wanted to say is, and because the writer and Tenzin Jiacho, and he is, you see, and a retiree from Voice of America, right? So, and his story and about Tibet and about the suffering, and so I quote the Jeremiah and from Tibetans, accusation from Tibetans, and to, you see, the tell the Chinese. So this is how, and I am, you see, from Sichuan, so I know I'm close to Tibetans, and so this is why I think that it's something I want to involve, I want to help. And second, I want to say, and especially we have people from Uyghur, Eastern Turkestan, or the Han Chinese call Xinjiang. And so some people would ask, say, what you are talking about, right? So we the Uyghurs are suffering. So I want to let everybody know that I can say that I am probably the first Han Chinese, and who has talk about openly that ethnic genocide was going on in Uyghur. So you can Google my name, you can Google genocide in Xinjiang, and you can see and who spoke is earlier than me, right? So this is the second point regarding to Xinjiang or Eastern Turkestan. Then also regarding to Mongolia, right? And so my friend here and Enghebatu, and so I think if we walk in the streets of New York, probably people think I am more Mongolian than you see him, or at least we're equally Mongolian. Yeah, because my father is from Manchuria, and so this is why. And in this, you see the a huge entanglement of thrones. I do not know. And from my ancestry, probably from my grandmother is that generation, and I inherited Mongolian, you see, in the blood. So this is why I want to say I am a global citizen. I have no country, and so I have no loyalty to any ethnic group or any single country. Because of that, I want to mention, and for all of us, it is extremely difficult at this moment because we face attacks from at least 3 directions. And of course, the frontal attack is from the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, right, through its transnational law enforcement. And then the back is a stab is from and major democracies all over the world, including the United States, including Germany, and including France and Great Britain or Austria or Hungary or Poland, right, and or Turkey and even India. So unfortunately, we can find and centrism, ethno-nationalism is a global phenomenon, and therefore we do have concern because the democratic the vantage point or the foundation or the Archimedean point we have occupied, we think that is the place we can leverage change in China. But unfortunately, our ground is shaky and our ground is diminishing to some extent. So this is why, we are fighting in the United States. We are fighting Trumpism, and the Trumpism and Chinese is in the Hitler, or I call it Xi-Dadaism, and I think they have something in common. So this is the issue we have to be aware. And so, the third, we have sidekicks, and no matter which panel I go, and regarding Uyghur or Tibetan, and or you see Mongol or Manchu or Taiwan or Hong Kong topics, and the people would always you see think I am not radical enough, and so this is how I face you see the sidekicks and from the people who I think I'm fighting along, and so this is what I just want to talk about. We are fighting the Han Chinese ethnic chauvinism. But we cannot just appeal to our own blood and soil ethnic centrism. Therefore, we can fight. So, I can make it very clear. My vantage point is completely from the combination of individualism and plus universalism. So, which is based upon liberal republicanism. So, this is where my vantage point or my horizon, right? So, I am utilizing. So now, if you understand, you see my background here. So let me talk about the draft law. What major issues there, and what I have seen. And so, as you see, and Frank mentioned, this draft law is the blatant, you see, refutation to the Chinese, you see, ethnic law passed in 1984. And but we know in 1984 China was in a more progressive era, and under Hu Yaobang and under Chinese is a more reform-minded leadership. And at that moment, you can find some major policies were implemented in Tibet too. And also we know, and proceeding to the 1984 national ethnicity law, and there was you see the new constitution in 1982. And so clearly you can find, and Xi Jinping has you see, revised the 1982 constitution, and by abolishing the term limit for the president and the vice president. And so Xi Jinping now is serving his 3rd term, and Xi Jinping wants to serve the 4th and the 5th. Therefore, he is trying to build under the so-called national unity because he wants to be the new emperor for the national rejuvenation. Therefore, he can serve, you see, for long life and with some kind of justification. And so this is a big, you see, part of China's, you see, constitutional coup, and since 2015, right? And Xi Jinping and Wang Hunin, and they push for the so-called top-level grand design, right? So this is what I want everyone to be aware. And under that, you see the issue. So you can find the Chinese government, which has become so open and to talk about, we are going to push for 大一统. So in this draft law, right, 大一统, and which is not, you see, a very positive term and in academia. And among the ethnic minorities or among the Chinese dissident, you see, community, 大一统 has never been a positive term. But the, you see, law and has, you see, openly, you see, put 大一统 and as, you see, the goal and for the draft law. So this is something we have to be aware. So the Chinese government today, they don't need, you see, the hypocrisy anymore. They don't need any, you see, window dressing. So they are very clear, very brilliant, and very blunt. This is what they are going to pursue, the grand unity. And so if we think about, and under Trump, the United States try to, you see, restore the melting pot and try to, you see, and use the white supremacism and to repress diversity, right, to demolish DEI. And I can say in China, the Chinese, you see, under Xi Dadaism, and he is trying to also bring China's, you see, and frying wok. So in the United States, we have melting pot. And so in China, they are, you see, using their frying wok. And so to create, I call it, you see, Hong Sao Rou, you see, the red stew. This is what the Chinese, you see, leaders, and they are trying to cook. So this is what I think 大一统, and it's very clear. Under 大一统, like we have Frank and also her Enghebatu, and already have a talk about 中华民族共同体, the, you see, the community of Chinese nation, right? And also especially the comprehensive mutually embedding, the comprehensive mutually embedding 就全方位的互嵌. Now, of course, it is more, you see, the Chinese, they're going to embed it into the I don't know what's the word we should use, the minority groups you do not want to talk about, or other ethnic groups, right? And clearly the Chinese and are thinking about and the dominance they have, therefore they can assimilate, they can have a forced assimilation. And also, and you can find, and the Chinese government is talking about, and the so-called, and we are going to build, you see, a spiritual homeland for everybody living in China. I think this is a big irony, and because spiritually speaking, the Chinese really they are in this spiritual crisis, and we can see the void, the emptiness. And I can tell you what I have learned from His Holiness from Dalai Lama. That is more, you see, the spiritual teaching than all I have learned in my whole education and in China, which I can say, I can boast about. I got the best education in China, right? And so this is what I want you to be aware. So the Chinese government is trying to use their emptiness and to build an empty spiritual homeland for a lot of other ethnic groups who they have rich spiritual legacy and heritage, and they are living with thriving and religions, and like Tibetan Buddhism is expanding. So this is what I want you to be aware. And also another important thing, and some of you mentioned, and Chinese law and always and it's on paper, it cannot be implemented on the ground and all this, right? And so, but we have to pay attention to this law, and it has talked about, and they are going to include it in the 5-year plan. And so with the, the budgetary assignment, and so this is how you can find, and there are many offices with budgetary, the assignments, and with personnel, they are going to be created for this purpose. And so we are going to see a massive propaganda campaign, first propaganda campaign, right? And the spiritual coercion, and because that's what Wang Hunin and is good at, right? And because Wang Hunin and is never a practitioner, and he's never is a person and with really and practical wisdom, and he is an armchair and a theorist. So this is how, and we are going to say propaganda campaign and force, coercive education, and also brainwashing, right? Also concentration camps, all this, they are going to, implement it. So this is what I want you to be aware. And so now, I want to say some other things. So are we feel doomed? So it's so difficult? I do not think so, and I have 3 sources of optimism. Number one, and I believe the Chinese economy, as some of you have already mentioned, and is entering long stagnation. And for the past 40 years, the Chinese government rely on economism and to try to show up its legitimacy, but clearly now they need ethno-nationalism. But in this ethno-nationalistic policy, they always create inequality. So in Chinese system, under Fei Xiaotong, the differentiated structure, you always have the Communist Party, the ruling oligarchs, right? They are, the vanguard, and they are the leading party. Then you have the ordinary people. Then you have the working class, and this draft law has mentioned very clear. And the Chinese Communist Party is the vanguard and of the working class in China. And so the working class, or basically, is another term for the urban people. They have enjoyed, the privilege over the urban people. And then the Han Chinese, right? They have, the privilege over an ethnic, the groups. So these are, in the process. And so we are going to say not the equality, but we are going to say deepening inequality. That's for sure, right? And so this is what I believe. Whatever they are doing is not going to solve the ethnic tensions. And this moment, they are becoming more important because why? Because the Chinese government is sensing the national security issue out of all these regions. And especially when Dalai Lama is pushing the envelope and talking about we are going to have the middle way and we are going to respect your constitution. How about you implement the 1984 ethnic nationality law, right? So all this has already pushed the Chinese government to the corner. And so in terms of discourse, and they have no justification, therefore they decided to just tear up and their constitution, their ethnic law, and to become brazen. So this is how I can say the impact from the overseas social movements and also Dalai Lama's and the middle way approach, and all this, they are playing important role. So I'm happy to say that. Second, I am optimistic because we are going through global crisis and global chaos, or people call it polycrisis. Polycrisis is not that bad because polycrisis and is going to make people aware, teach people a hard lesson. And especially if you look at Americans, MAGA people are suffering. Sometimes I have this Sheldon Freud, and I said, I told you so. And because after the big, madness, we are going to say great moderation. So I can say humanity eventually is going to, in the long run, is going to bend toward the good direction. So this is why I am happy to say the whole globe, the whole global population are living in anxiety, in chaos, and because we are searching a way out. So that's, I'm very optimistic because new technologies are creating. In human history, first time we have a leisure class without poverty, and they are going to create something I am ready to embrace. Number 3, and I think here we have to give the attention to the Chinese people and the Chinese people's longing for liberty and their the desire for being free and for spiritual evolution and for embracing the spiritual the teachings, and they are being practiced on daily basis within the Islamic community, within the Tibetan community. And so this is what I want to emphasize one thing. And when we talk about the Chinese, and so I do not think Chinese and this term and is an ethnic in the name, because Chinese clearly is from China, and China is not a name the Chinese and call themselves. So I am referring Chinese to all the people who are living today on the territory of the People's Republic of China, especially by birth, right? So they are all Chinese. Therefore, I believe, and we have, the Han Chinese, and we have Uyghur Chinese, and we have Manchu Chinese, and we have Tibetan Chinese. Why I say Chinese is not an ethnic name? Because China is not an ethnic name. And because in Chinese language and in Hanyu, and China means central nation, right? Central place. Therefore, my friend and Professor Huilin Wang, and he used the term centralia, right? And so this is Zhongguo. And so Zhongguo from Kaifeng, Luoyang, and expand out. And so this is a geographic, you see, opening development. And also I want to emphasize, and since the Yuan dynasty, right? So exact year is 1271, Yuan dynasty was founded, and to 1911, right? So how many years? It's 764 years. And the territory of today's China actually was under the rule of Mongols, right? The Mongols and from is the Mongol Empire, and Manchus also part of the Mongol is in the group. And so basically we are talking about for the past 764 years, and 83% of the time the people and today living in the territory of the People's Republic China, they actually live under the Mongolian and the Manchu rule. So this is how I really do not feel you see fair to talk about this Chinese occupied territory, or land is Chinese occupied territory. The Chinese never occupied Mongolia, and the Mongols brought you see Mongolia and they conquered China, right? And so Manchus, right? The Chinese never conquered Manchus, right? Manchuria. So Manchus conquered China, and so this is how I wanted to say. And this is in the stir, or this soup. And today we can say the Chinese soup. To some extent, in the kitchen, we have two major and Mongol and Manchu leaders. So this is what I want you to see and to be aware. And so my last point, right? So since I want to speak is from no ethnic perspective, and even my name and Xia means is in the Grand Xia. And that's the original name for China. And so China today is talking about the Huaxia culture. So I'm happy to say, okay, if you're going to create the Grand Xia, right, Huaxia, and so I'm happy about it. But I have to say, at this moment, we all need, you see, open discourse. We need to have dialogue, not to you see, go to fanaticism, to use one fanaticism to fight another fanaticism. If within our community, in our discourse, and we cannot have plural and democratic liberal understanding, if we cannot embrace benign civic nationalism, we're going to go to blood and soil, and to go to exclusiveness and narrow-mindedness. And I am thinking, and we are going to not only destroy China or destroy the Chinese Communist Party, I'm afraid we are going to destroy our humanity. And so my another nightmare, based upon my observing of what's going on in China, and one is the ongoing financial crisis. Many Chinese middle class people are going to become poor. They're going to lose their livelihoods. They're going to die. And then for the ethnic groups, no matter the Chinese, Han Chinese are going to kill the minority groups or ethnic groups, or vice versa. And we are going to see human tragedy. And so this is what you see, and I believe. Right? So at this moment, and we are going to defend our humanity, and we are going to have a reconciliation process. And so how we are going to start from, you see, overseas, the open dialogue. Therefore, we can have a grand, you see, vision, and therefore we can have, you see, a good design, and for what's, you see, going to happen, and what we want to embrace. I stop here. I use more than you see in the 10 minutes. Sorry, I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Xia, for that personalized way of telling us about the events. Thank you very much for those. May I request Mr. Pierro?
Yes.
Tozzi? Yeah, can you please?
Sure. Well, thank you, Professor Kondapalli, and also Rebon and the Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives for inviting me on this illustrious panel. And usually I don't get to be on panels because I'm putting panels together. And we have a couple of our fellow panelists that have been on CECC panels. Rushan Abbas, who's one of my heroes personally, and then Enghebatu Togochog. Both of them have testified numerous times before the Congressional Executive Commission on China. And Frank, it's a pleasure to be on a panel with you. I feel I know you from your erudite and witty LinkedIn postings, and we do have a nice repartee, so that is great. And while Ming and Rinzin we haven't met, I hope we do get a chance to know each other better. I thought I would briefly give some sort of big picture framing here, and then followed that with some top line thoughts on the draft law, and also give some indication of what we're going to be reporting on in our CECC annual report on ethnic issues. We hope to have the report released close to December 10th, which is Human Rights Day. And then I wanted to just finally highlight some of the political prisoners that we do have in our political prisoner database, just because to tell their stories. And probably one of the most important things that we do is to remember those who are persecuted on account of their race, ethnicity, religion, or political beliefs. One thing, I think there's a latent question in the title, rather, quote unquote, unity necessitates cultural erasure. And I think, sadly, from the perspective of Beijing, that answer is yes. And it is, I think, a combination of what I call Han ethno-supremacism. I know, Frank, you said Sino-nationalism, Ming ethnic chauvinism. I think that is a central tenet of it, and is also, I think, a drive to centralize and standardize that's born not only, by the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party, but also this legalism that's in the DNA of the Chinese Communist Party, the continuity with that earliest dynasty, the Qin dynasty, to unify China. Therefore all these things that we see, that desire to sinicize religion, to standardize the language. And I would note also the standardization of Mandarin does not only affect Tibetan or Uyghur or Mongolian, but also what we often term as dialects, Cantonese, Shanghainese, Hoklo, different ones as well. And it's this logic of quote unquote unity that requires the suppression of the other. And when it's applied to particular ethnic groups, it's a tendency towards genocide. And I do want to talk a little bit about that term, because I think when we think of genocide, we often think of gas chambers and the Holocaust and the eradication of DNA. But if you look at the Genocide Convention, there are a number of other provisions that go to a more subtle form of genocide. If you look at Article 2 there, that deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life to bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part. The imposing of measures intended to prevent births in the group, and Rushan in particular spoke about forced abortion, forced sterilization, that the Uyghurs suffer. And then another prong, though, of what constitutes genocide is forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And that we see that in the colonial boarding schools that impact Tibetans and Uyghurs. We also see it in this idea of becoming family that we see in the Uyghur region, where Han Chinese, and Rushan mentioned that, are assigned to homes and sometimes the beds, and also that forced intermarriage as well. And it is, and Frank, I think, drew out that historical context. It's not something that's unique to today or to the Chinese Communist Party, though I think technology of modernity has led to greater efficiency, whether it's Hikvision cameras in concentration camps in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, or American companies, and Rushan emphasized that point of the corporate complicity. Thermo Fisher Scientific, whose DNA markers are used to create databases of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and others, even to the point, it is alleged, for organ harvesting, for creating a base of who would be suitable for harvesting the most horrific of human rights abuses. I would, on the historical context, too, there's a chapter in the Cambridge World History of Genocide by Victoria Tinbor Hui, Genocide, Extermination, Mass Killings in Chinese History. and it does have deep roots. Frank highlighted some of the more recent things, but Professor Hui talks about during the Han Dynasty, Emperor Wu, the war of extermination against the Xiongnu. While I don't want to overstate that aspect of Chinese history, it is a thread, which does bring us to this the draft ethnic law. It's something that if earlier this fall, Xi Jinping was in the Uyghur region, where he marked and celebrated the party's control over that. He stressed the importance of ethnic unity and the Sinicization of religion. We've seen predecessors in law. 2020, the Tibet Autonomous Region adopted regulations on establishing a model area for ethnic unity and progress. We saw that then in Qinghai, Yunnan, similar things that also, again, the Sinicization of religion, any criminalization of any expressions that they say is quote unquote harmful to ethnic unity or progress. And we also see things like in Tibet, the celebration of Serf and Emancipation Day in March 2021, this similar regulations in the Uyghur region and the Inner Mongolia Autonomous region. If we look at the draft ethnic law, I think one thing that really sticks out is that Article 15 requirement of Mandarin language education on children, and against the backdrop of colonial boarding schools and the separation of children from the parents. We really, it becomes quite nefarious. We do see efforts to impose ethnic unity in Muslim ethnic minority communities. Articles 12, 40, 44 of the draft law all restrict expressions of religion, religious freedom, and again promote that Sinicization. Article 61. I think targets individuals outside of China. Indeed, our gathering here, when you think about it, could be a violation of Article 61 on its face. It says, for organizations or individuals conducting or supporting activities that undermine ethnic unity, as they define it, or incite ethnic division in China, you shall bear legal responsibility under Chinese law. I think one other thing to see with this long arm, to do entities and organizations in the West start to adopt nomenclature favored by the party? Do they use the word Tibet, or do they use the word Xinjiang? We saw a couple of museums in Paris that started to use that terminology, the Musée de Quai Branly and the Musée Guimet. They did, after pressure from Tibetan groups, did change that back to Tibet, but that is something to watch. Again, that it's the education. It's that the saying that's been variously attributed to Lenin and to the Jesuits: if you give me the 7-year-old, I'll give you the man. It is that early elementary education, really, when the law specifies preschool education in Mandarin, and also Article 15, Article 16, nationally compiled textbooks and curricula that reflect the goal of forging a strong sense of Chinese national community. And what's interesting is this law would also undermine the legal force or undercut of the previous regional ethnic autonomy laws too. So you are going beyond even what the existing law would require. Article 20, again, especially pernicious because it undermines that bond between parent and child. Parents and guardians must teach minors to love the Chinese Communist Party, the motherland, the people, and the Chinese nation, and must not instill concepts harmful to ethnic unity. To say that this violates international human rights standards, for example, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, sub 3, that says that parents have a prior right to choose the type of education for their children. It's really to state the obvious, and Frank listed a number of treaties that have been violated, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. One of the themes of our annual report that's going to be coming out is this notion of promises made and promises broken, how the Chinese government routinely enters into these international agreements only to break them. And one thing I want to state with regards to the law, it's the supremacy and the primacy of the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese Communist Party ideology that appears throughout the law. It is Article 2 in particular, and also any reference to the Chinese Constitution, and here I do want to take a little bit of a distinction. The Chinese Constitution is not flawless. It is premised again on the supremacy of the Chinese Communist Party. And that's why any rights that are in there are completely illusory. And indeed, I think even when we talk about the Constitution, or refer to laws, in a way we're legitimizing it. It is not a constitution in this. I mean, people hear that and they say that, oh, well, they have a constitution, we have a constitution. It's the same thing when we use terms. Western media does this all the time, calling Xi Jinping president, Zongtong. He's not a Zongtong. Lai Ching-te in Taiwan, ROC, is a president. Xi Jinping's title is chairman, or give his party title, general secretary. That idea also, 法治, rule of law, it's ruled by law, and it's really ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. So I think that, that Confucian idea of Zhenming, to call things by their proper name, is very important. You get the premise wrong, you get the conclusion wrong. So I think it is really important to be aware of that. Just to kind of give some, our annual report will highlight a number of acts that have been committed over the past year against ethnic minorities. We see Hui religious communities, targeted syncretization of Islamic communities, the cutting off of minaret towers and the like. We also see state control over grazing and interference with herders, economic traditions. This impacts the Mongolian people. There too, you have these grazing ban teams that keep watch over the grasslands and prevent people, and it's fines, confiscation of livestock, which is people's means to economically survive, beatings, and also detention. We've seen that the mass atrocities and other crimes against the people in Xinjiang have not abated, even though the obvious concentration camps are less prevalent. We've seen an expansion of forced labor of Uyghurs and other Turkic people as well. We also see restrictions, and Rushan referenced it, on the observance of Ramadan. And then, of course, the continued interference in the selection process of the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. And just as with the Panchen Lama was disappeared in an attempt to place a compliant interloper, declare that as the Panchen Lama. We've also seen mass expulsions. The Langar Buddhist Academy, that has people have been expelled. Monks have been expelled from that. We see the destruction of monasteries as well. And I do want to, and I think it is important. And again, Stalin, I think, said that the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of millions is a statistic. So it is important, I think, to name names and to remember people. And thank you, Rushan, for for mentioning your sister Gulshan, that all this repression has a human face. Ilham Tohti, I think if you want to talk about true unity and diversity and someone who is dedicated to interethnic harmony, Han and others, that would have been Ilham Tohti. He was a professor at Minzu University in Beijing. He started Uyghur Online. And for these efforts, he has been sentenced to life in prison. I know his daughter here, and it's tragic. This has a real impact on families, and this is a tremendous injustice. I would also note that his prison guard, Uyghur prison guard, Gopar Abdur Reshid, has also been imprisoned because he circulated information about the horrible condition that Ilham Tohti is being kept in, that he's in poor health. Ironically, I think he was saying that as a warning to other Uyghur prisoners that you better toe the line. But because that information got out, he too has been punished. Other Ma Yue, a Hui Muslim from Yunnan, again arrested for illegal preaching, and when there was people rallied in Ma's defense, they too were suppressed. That's something that we see throughout China. I also want to highlight a young woman named Zhang Yadi. She's ethnic Chinese, ethnic Han, but she advocated for Tibetans. She, because of that, just in July, she was arrested and is detained, and because of her advocacy there. There are a number of Tibetans, Lodre Gyatso, who's done several long-term stints in prison for speaking up for independence and Tibetan rights. Tashi Wangchug, another Tibetan language advocate in prison. Gompon Namgyal, another Tibetan community leader who died in an extrajudicial killing due to torture in prison. It's important that we remember these names and don't forget them. Again, it impacts individuals, impacts families. That's just a representation, really, of people who suffer for that desire, that human desire to preserve memory, so that their cultures are not erased. And I do think it is important to note that the largest victims of the Chinese Communist Party are the Chinese people themselves, the Han people, just simply by virtue of numbers. And as long as the Chinese Communist Party remains in power, there will be injustice, there will be repression, there will be division. I'd like to thank the foundation for inviting me. I'd also like to thank my staff members who will remain anonymous so that they don't become targets themselves, not just for helping me put together this speech, but the great work that they do in our annual report, and also in maintaining a political prisoner database, so that we do not forget. Anyway, thank you, everyone, and really, it's great to be here with you. You folks you're the real heroes out there. So thanks for including me.
Thank you, Mr. Tozzi, for the elaborate presentation, and also, most important, the remembering the victims, their names, their contribution. I think that was quite substantial presentation. Are there any afterthoughts that the paper presenters would like to make? Any final comments? Otherwise, we will wind up after this section.
So, I don't have any afterthought, but I have one question for Dr. Ming Shah. Like Dr. Ming Shah said, he's a student of Wang Huning, and I really used to read Wang Huning's book, especially the America against America, which he have written during his 90s. So, sir, in your observations, in your view, sir, what you have seen in Wang Huni in the past 2 to 3 decades, which like in his ideologies, if there is any changes in that, if there is any changes, what led to that changes in your views? So, based on your own observations, sir, since like you are a student of Wang Huni itself, and like, what's your view on that, sir? Like how his ideologies in the 30 years back and now, like, is there any shift? If there is any shift, like, so what factor might have so impacted his shift in this kind of like shifts, which if there is any shift, so just a short.
Okay, I have his book America Against America. This book was given to me by my former student, and because my former student and helped and promote and also finance this book and in Shanghai, and so this is how you can find, because Wang Huning was my former teacher, so this is how, and it's fascinating. And let me say, Wang Huning is a typical example and of a scholar with a hodgepodge of ideas, cut from different sources, but I think just for a very pragmatic purpose, without systematic criticism and also sorting out. And so he, is a person or a thinker full of contradictions. And so if we look at Wang Huning, we can find Leninism, Marxism, and Orthodox Maoism, and so Chauvin, pan-chauvinism. But one important thing is from Wang Huning, you can find the left thinking and from the West. And so if you think about Foucault, think about French thinker Plantas, think about, because he was trained as a French interpreter, and also think about his stay in the United States, and he lived in the house for half a year with my advisor. So this is how all Wang Huning's book were given to me by my advisor, because he signed and gave to my advisor. So this is how, and this is a very entanglement you can find. Wang Huning come here and to stay with China specialists, and most China specialists, they had a kind of a passion for pure Chinese socialism. And so this is how, and they would tell or share with Wang Huning how in the United States there was ground up impulse for socialism, and for example in Iowa or Amish community and all this kind of stuff. So this is how Wang Huning clearly, and he is taking something from the United States, and he thinks this can be used against the United States. And actually, I think Trump has given him the big sledgehammer, so he can use against the United States. So this is what I just want you to be aware. And Wang Huning is very, very, of course, smart and very pragmatic. But one important thing is, and his theory is very self-contradictory, because, and I always said, and he never got full training as a college student, so he did not have a bachelor's degree, and he has never get a solid training and in PhD program, so he does not have PhD degree. I don't mean you don't have bachelor's degree or PhD degree, you are not smart. And so Jesus Christ, right, and Muhammad, right, none of them they have PhD or bachelor's degree. But I do think, and in today's China and in modern education, Wang Huning and his thinking is flawed, and therefore, and his flawed thinking is a reflection of the flawed governance in China. And but of course, and when we I have criticized white supremacism and Trumpism, and in this country, and but I don't think, and there is a moral equivalency of Xi Dadaism and Trumpism, and because, and as Camille once said, and yeah, I know, and Nazi Germany is a tyranny. I'm going to say the fight against tyranny, but many people said, why do we fight? Because in Great Britain, where also monarchy is not, it's a full democracy. Camille said, yeah, I'm going to defend a half democracy against a full tyranny. For the same situation, I am in the United States. I'm going to defend, at this moment, a shaky, a deteriorating democracy against a rising tyranny, period. Okay.
Good. So,
sorry, I would like to
yes, Frank,
ask
please go ahead.
Dr. Xia, very interesting, and I heard you before last year you were talking about Wang Huning. Now, everybody knows that Xi Jinping is not very articulate, and a lot of his Xi Jinping thought was written by Wang Huning. Yeah? Do you think that this law here that Wang Huning did contribute to it somehow? Did he was he involved in drafting or in the 中华民族共同体意识? Was he involved in that? Do you think that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and also I think some of my former classmates, because they were placed into some key positions, regarding Tibet and Taiwan, and so here we have not talked about Taiwan, but of course this law is also targeting Taiwan too, right?
Yeah.
And also because you have the self-independence movement in Hong Kong too, right? So this is, I believe, and Wang Huning is a major thinker, and especially after he became the chairman of the Political Consultative Conference, and also one important thing. And because under his portfolio, and not only a foreign propaganda campaign, not only a united front work, not only all these ethnic minority issues, right? All this, and he of course has a big mandate and broad, portfolio. So I think whatever we see, and because he proposed in the last year's third plenum, and the so-called the Great United Front work. And so they are serious about it. They are going to put money there. If we have talk about Hollywood was captured and by the greatest propaganda campaign, right? And so I'm sure, and more people in this country are going to be captured and put in the pocket and by the Great United Front work. And so you also can find among China scholars, China specialists, and we can see droves. And I can count, and at least 20 people. There are some quite famous. They abandoned the United States, or abandoned some other Western posts, and to embrace the comfort of unfreedom in China, right? So this is Wang Huning is behind of all this.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those wonderful presentations. We are better educated at the end of the day on the draft ethnic law. Please be in touch with the Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives. We have a website. You're most welcome to contribute your opinion pieces, or if you have published, we would like to also recycle some of these, cite them to the original source. So thank you very much, all of you. It's a wonderful meeting, and grateful to the presentations.